All right, thanks everyone for coming. Can you hear me okay? This is good. Okay. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Hannah Phillips. I'm the State Lands Administration Program Manager. I work on management planning work statewide. I actually live and work in Montpelier, and I can say that definitely one of my favorite parts of my job is traveling out to visit state lands in the district. So tonight we are launching the Okemo State Forest management planning process. I will kick things off, and then you'll hear from our staff who work in the district and know these properties very well, and they'll tell you about their work inventorying and assessing the lands that we are beginning the management planning process for. So I hope you come out of this with a better sense of what they know and love about these lands, and also a clear sense for how the management planning process unfolds, where we are now, what comes next, and how you can engage in this process throughout. Just some public service announcements to begin. If you need a restroom, restrooms are down on the first floor. Take the hallway back. It's probably right underneath us right now. Exits on both sides of the building. So just to give you a run through of goals for tonight's meeting and the schedule. First, we want to open by describing the management planning process. I'll then turn it over to the district staff, and they will walk us through all the different resources on the property to highlight the natural and cultural resources of Okemo State Forest. We want to make sure that you understand how to engage in this part of the process and submit your comments, that you understand what's coming next in the planning process. Very important for tonight, we want to give you an opportunity to engage with all members of the district stewardship team, those staff that are standing around the room right now, and give you an opportunity to share your initial thoughts about management of Okemo State Forest. Just to give you a sense for how the next couple of hours will unfold, our presentation will probably take us to about 7. At that time, we're basically going to break out into an open house format. I know a lot of you were checking out the beautiful maps that we have stationed around the room. After we finish the presentation, our staff will go stand next to the maps that they are responsible for, and we will stay here until 8 o'clock to answer questions from you, have conversations with you, learn from you about your understanding and familiarity of the property. And that open house style, can you still hear me? That will take us to 8 o'clock. Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge some key conservation partners. I think Willem's going to come help us. I think this is necessary for the live stream. Who have been central to conserving Okemo State Forest. So you can see the list up here, but just to talk through the Conservation Fund, Okemo Mountain Resort, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board provides funding for land conservation, the Mount Holly Conservation Trust, the Weston Land Trust, Vermont Land Trust, Trust for Public Land, the Nineveh Foundation, the Forest Echo Foundation, the Forest Service, legislative representatives, Jay Majowski, Kim Royer, and Nancy Bell, Town of Mount Holly, Ludlow, Weston, and Andover. Of course, not a comprehensive list, but many people who have been essential. Sorry. Thank you.
Sure.
This work okay? I don't know if this is working. Okay. To growing and managing Okemo State Forest. So important to start there. We all work for the Agency of Natural Resources. There are 3 departments within the Agency of Natural Resources: the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Environmental Conservation. Each of these 3 departments have their own unique mission. I'm not going to read the missions, but trust me that they are each unique and distinct, but they are all in service to the larger mission of the Agency of Natural Resources, which is charged with the oversight and management of Vermont's natural environment on behalf of the people of Vermont. So we work together with staff from across the 3 departments to manage lands that are owned by the Agency of Natural Resources on behalf of Vermont's public. And in our collaborative work, we benefit from the interdisciplinary expertise of staff from across the agency who you will meet tonight. The microphone working okay, Willem? Okay. So what is a long-range management plan? Oh, thank you. Okay. A long-range management plan, you might also hear us refer to this as the management plan or an LRMP, is a document that guides management of state lands. It generally lasts for 20 years. It is developed by the local land managers who you will meet tonight. And it includes, among other things, preliminary assessment of natural resources. That's what is depicted on the maps all around us and that you're going to hear about tonight. It outlines management goals for the next 20 years, management actions for the next 20 years, and the process itself is designed with multiple opportunities for public comment. And this is the first of multiple opportunities in the planning process. Why do we write management plans? Through this process, it helps us understand current conditions on the ground. The public engagement portion helps us understand public desires and opinion about management and use of those lands, helps us understand how people are using them, what they would like to see in the future. Through this process, especially the interdisciplinary work across our 3 departments, it helps us thoughtfully consider how we balance multiple uses and uses that may at times compete with one another. This is the process that helps us provide opportunities that the public is seeking and that are consistent with the agency and department missions. Planning on the 20-year horizon ensures that management is taking us in the direction we want to go, so it allows us to take the long view. And it's really our opportunity to think big and kind of scale up and think about where the unit that we're planning for fits into the larger landscape scale across state land boundaries, within the larger conservation landscape, and also across time. So across staff, across administrations, it lets us really look farther out into the distance about where we're trying to go and think about how we're going to get there. How do we write long-range management plans? This is the process really distilled down to 5 major steps. We are really in the beginning of this process. The first is the resource assessments. That's when all of our staff who are here tonight go out and complete their inventories on the ground and turn those inventories into written summaries and maps that are shown here tonight. That work is complete. We then conduct public scoping. That's what tonight, we're launching the public scoping process tonight. We also consider that the assessment of public interest. So hearing from you about your use of and interest in these lands. This marks the beginning of that process, but that will continue until January 23rd. We then use the resource assessments and the public scoping results to inform a draft management plan. And that's where we actually spell out the management goals and actions for the next 20 years. So that's been started by nature of the resource assessments and the scoping work having begun. But tonight we're not sharing proposed management goals or actions. That comes later when we prepare and release a draft plan, which we would then present to you and invite your feedback on. So tonight is really the beginning and hearing from you about your interface and interaction and hopes for Okemo State Forest. There's then public comment on the draft plan that hasn't started. And then a revised management plan would come after we receive feedback on the draft plan. Who does the planning? I've been referring to our staff, but I'm going to introduce them. State lands are managed in 5 districts. You can see the district map up on the screen. Within each district, we have what is called the district stewardship team that includes experts from across those 3 departments. And they're responsible for writing management plans and implementing management on state lands. And so the planning process is led by the members of the district stewardship team who are here tonight from the Springfield district office, District 1. So I'm going to introduce them and have them wave. The first is Aaron Hurst, our state lands forester. Second is Lauren Masiria, our Parks Regional Manager. Third is Brian Renfro, our state lands forester and recreation specialist. We also have Chris Bernier, our wildlife ecologist, who's over here. Courtney Buckley, our fish biologist. Danielle Ozarski, our state lands ecologist who works across all 5 districts and all state lands. Marie Caduto, our basin planner. And then this process is supported by a number of staff from our central office in Montpelier, myself, Jim Duncan, our forestry state lands manager, my goodness, and Ella Samuel, our agency lands planner. And of course, the person who is in charge of all of it is Tim Morton, our stewardship forester. I have you as a header here. Your name is in bold, so sorry that he's in charge of everything. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Tim to give you the introduction to Okemo State Forest.
How do we advance?
Just the arrow.
Okay. I'll just hold this. Thank you for coming. As Hannah said, I'm the stewardship forester for the district. The first time I was ever on Okemo State Forest was actually in 1984. I was a college intern and I was there with some folks you might know of, Roy Burton, Myron Smith, and John Cole. So I've been on the property a long time. In 1987, I became an employee, a full-time employee, and started working on public land and private land in this area. So I've spent close to 40 years on the parcel and the parcels around it. Okemo is one of the largest blocks of contiguous forest land in this region. And it's certainly the largest piece in this district. We manage roughly 50 parcels, and this is the largest one. Of the collection we have, which starts in Massachusetts and ends in Randolph and goes east-west from the Connecticut River over to Rutland County and Bennington County. The parcel is close to 8,000 acres. It's 12 square miles. It starts roughly on Andover Ridge in Andover, all the way north to Tiny Pond. And then obviously on the east flanks, you can see where we've got 103, Route 100, 155. It's a very large parcel. It's a very long parcel. It's mostly contiguous. And on the maps, the blank spot between the two larger blocks is Owasso's WMA, which is now connecting this whole corridor that Chris will talk about later. It is located in 4 towns, Mount Holly, Ludlow, Weston, Andover. Important features for the region are the 3 mountaintops. We have Okemo Mountain, South Mountain, Terrible Mountain, all visible from many, many places, including New Hampshire. And obviously one of those summits supports the Okemo Mountain Resort. That's one of the notable large-scale features on Okemo State Forest. There's also the Okemo Summit and Tower, which is a well-known destination. The Buttermilk Falls, which is a small area. It's only 7 acres, but it has outsized importance because it's such a primary recreation area for us. Regarding the forest resource, I'm mainly going to focus on the primary forest types of the parcel, and Danielle will talk more about some of the unique natural communities that occupy the upper slopes and wetlands and places like that. The forest of Okemo is supported by some really exceptional soils and a high proportion of exceptional soils, which is not so typical for mountain properties. They're considered highly productive. In this map, you can see the green and the yellow are basically what we would call site-one soils. That means they have the most potential for growing trees and for growing healthy trees and for supporting diverse understories in the forest. And most of the tree stand diversity is related directly to those soil types. Roughly 65% of the parcel soils are considered to be highly productive, and roughly 45% of the parcel ground is considered suitable for forestry and habitat management, exclusive of the steep slopes and the wetlands and the upper elevations. So I said it's largely forested. It's 96% forest. And the forests in Okemo are primarily deciduous northern hardwood type forest, which is mostly a maple beech ash forest. There are conifer summits and mixed stands on the side flanks and wetland edges, but most of Okemo is a northern hardwood forest. Some 60% plus is northern hardwood. The primary tree species on the parcel are sugar maple, white ash, yellow birch, American beech, and red spruce. And the reason I highlighted sugar maple is because of those trees, sugar maple is a predominant species. There are many parts of Okemo that are nearly pure sugar maple stands. A lot of those sugar maple stands that are heavy to sugar maple have an ash component. We have to point out that in this forest, like many forests in this area, American beech and white ash are under serious stress from introduced pests, emerald ash borer and beech leaf nematode. We think, and scientists think, there's a really good chance that in 10 or 15 years that most of those trees will be gone from these insects killing them. On Okemo, most of the parcel has a fairly undiverse understory. We look at the understory of the forest as the future forest, and on Okemo, much of the understory is a mix of beech, striped maple, and witch hobble, with some introduced plants and a lot of heavy moose damage. So we have a diverse forest above, and we have a fairly undiverse future forest below. When you're going around to the various stations, you'll see the maps are broken up with polygons, and they're broken up by blocks and stands. And that's how we think about these parcels from a planning standpoint. So we'll often reference the blocks of the parcels in talking about where certain things are happening or the information about them. It's what we use for our record keeping and for our planning. They're fixed in time. We use those blocks and compartments, and we'll continue to use those in this planning process. The forest stands are more biological. We use those in silvicultural planning, and they are more typically areas of similar trees and similar sites that we divide the parcel up to, so we can think about the different tree stands in that manner. Much of Okemo is what we would call a single age forest. There was extensive harvesting here in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s for wood for steam production for the Hillsville train. And much of Okemo was heavily logged up to the summits into many places where we wouldn't go today. And then after that age, then there were sawmills located on the flanks of Okemo for additional cutting. So when the state acquired this parcel, the original parcel in 1935, it was really in a growth phase, and it was in that growth phase until I think roughly 1962, when a very limited timber harvest program began. And that has continued through several planning processes and several long-range management plans. And because it's been limited, we are continuing to add wood biomass all the time at Okemo. And at this point, we estimate that the wood volume there exceeds 14 million cubic feet in the bollwood only. It doesn't include the grounds and root systems. The other point that I wanted to make here is that if you look at the map on the right, you can see the cross hatching, and you can also see the pink polygons. Those are the areas above 2,500 feet, and Jay, help me out with a natural area name. Terrible Mountain Natural Area. You weren't much help. You just looked at me. So that is an area that's in a large area in passive management, being allowed to grow into late successional forest over time, and it has been in that condition since the last management plan. I would say there are some threats to the forest at Okemo, which includes introduced plants, which is a minor problem on the property at this point, and we have it fairly well under control. Introduced insects is a serious concern. I mentioned beech and ash is a really serious concern for us. But also increased stormwater and increased drought conditions are becoming apparent on the forest. Much of Okemo State Forest is supported by fertile soils with a high number of trees in a similar age class. Sugar maple is really by far the most common tree, and beech is a predominant understory species. So this extensive tree monocultures and limited quality regeneration are a risk, and the strong soils and a more recent history of careful forest management and connection to that large matrix forest is really an asset for resilience for the property. And now we can go from tree history. I think we go to cultural history next.
All right. My name is Aaron Hurst. I've been working on Okemo State Forest for about 27 years, so I'm just a kid compared to Tim. We've done an assessment of the historic resources. Okemo State Forest has been a very busy place historically, but you can basically boil it down to 4 subcategories, and the first one is the earliest one, the Native American context. There are no Native American sites found on Okemo State Forest at this point in time, but 3 have been found in the Branch Brook area. And on the Jackson Gore, they had to do some studies to do that development, and they did end up finding a few Native American artifacts in that process. In the Native American context, I'll point to, if I can, what's referred to as Ludlow Gap. That's right here. You see that? People have been using that area since the last glaciation. And the Native Americans went through there on their way from the Connecticut to Lake Champlain. And they went up Branch Brook, and they went up what's now Route 11, up 100, and then they hit this gap, and it's called the Ludlow Gap. And not only Native Americans were there, but the animals also have used that, and we use it today. It's 103. It's and it's the railroad. So when European settlers came, they used those old trails, and they used this Ludlow Gap. And the first real development of that area was the Crown Point Road had a spur that went right through the Ludlow Gap. That was in the mid 1700s. And that was the making of Route 103, the original. And then the village of Healdville popped up, which is right in here. That was a very busy place. And it started with logging camps and mills. And by the early 1800s, there was a whole village there with stores and all the rest of it. The Rutland and Burlington Railroad was built through here in 1849. There's still a railroad there, is that all you know? And farm clearing and expansion was the name of the game through the late 1800s. You can see most of the yellow dots on this map are historic homesteads, farmsteads, mills. Each one of those represents something that we found on the forest. That doesn't mean that we found it all. It's a big area, and there's more stuff out there, but this is where we've found sites. You can see it, there's a few intense areas. The Healdville circle doesn't do it justice. There's a lot of points underneath those 2 points that you see, 3 points. And then this Felton Road area, those are historic farms primarily. Interesting place. And then we get into the Civilian Conservation Corps, 35 to 41. The base camp for this area, for this particular group, was near the Okemo Mountain Resort Base Lodge. I think that most of that infrastructure is now gone, but that was a big push in the state of Vermont, and that's what designed or was the impetus for a lot of our state parks now. And they also built the almost 4-mile mountain road up to the top, and they built the first tower that was later used as a fire tower. And then the popularization and development of winter recreation really started in the early 1900s. People thought it was a good idea to strap wood planks to their feet and go down the mountain. So that started the ski industry. But the CCCs really developed the trails and the infrastructure for the original recreation. And the first rope tow was put in about 1938. And then the trails, lift, restaurant, all the developing stuff happened around 1955. Here's just a picture of the Black River Lumber Company in Healdville Station. As I said, Ludlow Gap was an important place long before we got here. The Green Mountain Railroad, which is now the Green Mountain Railroad, runs along 103, as I said, and it's still running today. And then there was a lot of sawmills and a lot of, well, the whole mountain was cleared at one point in time, and it's much different than it is today. We have 96% forested versus what was probably almost zero at the turn of the century. So you can see a lot of these remains left. Healdville, right at the trailhead. If you walk up in the woods and even from the trail, you can see some stuff, but there's a lot going on there, or was. And so that's historic. And I'll do the legal constraints too. Legal constraints are all of the things that we need to consider that go along with a piece of land. And it's the stuff that we're bound to manage for, regardless of what a particular desired outcome is. But we can break these into four as well, four main categories. One is licenses, leases, and agreements. That's a big category. But the biggest constraint on this property, or the biggest legal constraint, I guess, is the Okemo Mountain Resort. They lease 1,200 acres from the state of Vermont, and it's all the higher elevation lands. And the current lease that's signed goes through 2053. These are long-term things. There's nothing that and it could change over time, but it's a process. Some other things that are included in the license leases and agreements are some of the utility rights of way, the railroad rights of way. The mountain road has special agreements. There's some sugaring leases, and we have a bunch of special use permits that we give to private individuals for various things like collecting seedlings or some research, UVM with the research grants. Another one is conservation easements. Hannah went through the list of partners, and whenever we have partner conservation organizations, usually what that means is that they hold what we call a conservation easement, and any money that we get usually comes from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and they require a conservation easement for release of those monies, and VLT usually monitors them. A couple of other ones are the federal legacy program. Those are federal dollars where, if I just turned it off. We have a couple of those. These are private ownerships, but they have conservation easements on them. So that the conservation easements basically say there won't be any development on these lands. That's not a big hurdle for us. We're not planning on developing anything, but for private individuals, these conservation easements are kind of a big deal, and they are in perpetuity with the land, no matter who owns it. And then we have the Terrible Mountain Natural Area. That's a legislative constraint. That one was signed by Howard Dean. I think it was Howard Dean. And that's just the high elevations of Terrible Mountain. So and it's a state designation, so it has to be signed by the governor. This map doesn't show it, but when over the 8,000 acres, that's a lot of chunks that we have to pull in over time. They don't all come at once. And as in with anybody that's bought property, there's always some deed restrictions or rights of way that come with a piece of land. In this case, we have rights of way both to the state and to private entities over state land. We have building restrictions, we have roads and trails, and we have water and mineral rights. Those are frequently described in deeds. And the fourth category is the regulatory stuff, which is Act 250. And you can see anything over 2,500 feet is under Act 250 jurisdiction. All the mountain resort, the Okemo Mountain Resort is under Act 250 jurisdiction. And then there's associated town permits that we need and legislative mandates that we need to meet. And that's kind of the rundown of the legal stuff. And I am not at this station over here. And if there's any specific questions about either the historic or the legal constraints, I'm happy to answer any questions. With that, we'll go on to Danielle with ecological.
Hi, folks. My name is Danielle Ozarski. I'm the state lands ecologist. And I have a confession to make. I'm not as intimately familiar with this property as Tim and Aaron are. I've worked for the state since 2022, and my predecessors are the ones that did the ecological inventory for this site. So I'd be really excited to hear some of the things that you know about this site, and feel free to ask me questions as well. I'm going to focus on biophysical region, natural communities, and rare and uncommon plant species. You'll hear more from Chris Bernier, our wildlife ecologist, about the exceptional overall landscape connectivity of this unit. Okemo State Forest really is, in my mind, a true slice of the southern Green Mountains. We have some rolling hills of the northern hardwoods mingled with the high elevation spruce, fir, and birch on terrible Ludlow and South Mountains. We have beaver ponds and wetland seeps, which congregate in the lower and flatter regions of the site. And these play an outsized role in climate regulation, water quality, flood control, and biodiversity. This region does have many similarities with the northern Green Mountains. High mountains, acidic bedrock, cold temperatures, heavy precipitation, and it's dominated by many of the same forest types. This region is part of the Appalachian Mountain System that stretches across much of the eastern side of North America. The terrain of Okemo State Forest is steep, though there are some large high elevation plateaus and moderate slopes, which separates this a bit from the northern greens. The mountains here, including Terrible Mountain, are a part of a long belt of ancient metamorphosed rocks formed by mountain building hundreds of millions of years ago. So way before Tim and Aaron were here. The acidic metamorphosed gneiss and quartzite bedrock is much older than the similar rocks found in the northern Green Mountains. And we have found a few small inclusions of calcareous rock, notably near the height of land near Route 100. Streams like Cobb Brook take advantage of cracks in this resistant bedrock and create features such as Buttermilk Falls, where water has sculpted dramatic drops and plunge pools. And, as Aaron talked about a little, glacial ice that once covered the region really smoothed and reshaped the mountains and valleys long before these streams etched the waterfalls that we enjoy today. And it's responsible for the glacial till and the till-derived soils that Tim was talking about underneath the vegetation and in the stream channels. Okemo's mix of gentle hills, rugged forest slopes, and waterfalls really beautifully showcase the southern greens, rich geologic history, extensive forest, and its natural beauty. So now let's talk about natural communities. So natural community is an assemblage of biological organisms, their physical environment, and the interactions between them. I like to think of them as repeating patterns of life across the land, the particular mix of plants and animals and soils that show up again and again, wherever the environmental conditions are similar. While the almost 8,000 acres of Okemo State Forest feature 21 distinct natural communities, it's really dominated by 3 of those communities that cover over 92% of the land area within the unit. So about 60%, as Tim said, is covered by northern hardwood forest, and we find this in the mid elevations and in the higher elevations. And then 17 and 14% respectively is covered by montane, yellow birch, red spruce forest. I haven't skied at Okemo, but I'm assuming that's probably where some of the nicest glades are on the mountain if you're a skier or is found in those areas. And then there's also a large portion of red spruce and northern hardwood forest. So overall, Okemo State Forest is largely a forested landscape. The remaining community types are considered small patch. So they're really just small parts of it that make up a less area. So seeps are really abundant here. So these are areas where water collects, ends up getting pushed out by bedrock. They're great places for bears and other animals in the springtime to chomp on the first things that come up and start budding and greening up. But wetlands, they're really small and sparsely scattered, and they only cover about 1% of the landscape at Okemo. Over 35 seeps were mapped, and there's likely more. So these are small things that, unless you're covering every square inch, it's hard to find everyone. So there are a few cliffs, talus, and outcrop communities. And I just want to make a point that these small patch communities play really an outsized role in supporting the diversity of species that utilize these lands. So some notable small patch communities include boreal talus, woodland, hemlock forest, lowland spruce fir forest, red spruce cinnamon fern swamp, which is one of the main wetland communities, riverside outcrop and river cobble shores, where Buttermilk Falls is, and then sugar maple floodplain forest. We have a small representation of that, and of course vernal pools as well that support amphibians. So as you may have guessed, or maybe not, this property isn't particularly diverse in rare plant species due to the acidic bedrock and how it's situated elevationally. But the forest supports 4 known rare and uncommon plant species, and those are indicated by green circles on the map. They're quite small. But additional inventory, which is always ongoing, anytime I'm out at a site reviewing a project, may uncover more of these species. A few of these include greens rush, showy mountain ash, and a historic record of trailing stitchwort that we haven't been able to find yet again, but maybe we will. Rare animals are indicated by yellow circles on the map, and Bicknell's thrush is a small rare bird species of high conservation that has been documented within Okemo State Forest. Chris may talk more about that. We have 4 state-listed non-migratory bats that have hibernacula near Okemo State Forest, but acoustic monitoring that we've conducted at this point hasn't found any evidence of threatened or endangered bat populations in the area. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Good evening. I'm Chris Bernier. I'm a wildlife biologist working with the gang out of the Springfield office. I've been working with the department for 31 years, and state lands have been a part of my career for the entire length, but more intensively so for the last 10 to 12 years. So I'm going to talk about some wildlife resources and some of the highlights here. So as a wildlife biologist, I think one of the most exciting things about this property is how it contributes to the overall biodiversity of this region and how it strengthens connected landscape. And when you think about Okemo State Forest, its size, nearly 8,000 acres, and its juxtaposition, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about here in a minute, on the landscape, you get a sense of what I'm talking about. It is an incredibly valuable property for wildlife, for the number of species that it can host because of the diversity of the forest, diversity of the forest types, and also the connectivity that it affords. So it's really a gem, and it's worthy of being excited about. So let me explain. So in 2018-ish, 2 of my colleagues with the Department of Forest and Parks, both ecologists with the department, Eric Sorensen and Bob Zano, endeavored to create a roadmap for conservation here in the state. It's called the Vermont Conservation Design. I'm sure many of you have probably heard about it. It's been talked a lot about lately because it's pretty significant. And what this is a model. It's a GIS, a Geographic Information Systems based model, which layers all the data we have on top of each other. So for example, roads and distances to roads and houses and natural communities of significance and rare, threatened, endangered species and streams and wetlands and on. It's all the GIS data that we have layered on top of each other. And when you look down through that, you can see where your highest concentrations are of all of these things that are important to us. And so you get a sense of your biggest bang for your buck of where to conserve these lands. And on the left here, you can see the example of a map, which again, I will explain a little bit more. So there's a whole host of things that are potential outcomes of Vermont conservation design, but the two that are key to this property, Okemo State Forest, are interior forest blocks. And so interior forests are places or these large expanses of forests that are relatively unbroken, unfragmented, where the life history requirements of many, many species can be fulfilled. And there's also within these forest blocks that are buffered from all of our human activities by distance. The ecological processes that take place there are kind of buffered from our influence in some way as well. And so we can protect and preserve those ecological processes in those intact interior forests. And the map here on the left highlights some of those interior forests. And it's a prioritization. So, they're not all the same. There's ones that are larger, which are going to be higher priority than others, and so on and so forth. The star obviously is where Okemo State Forest is, and the star kind of covers one of the key features that I wanted to point out here. But the other outcome of Vermont conservation design is finding on the landscape where these interior forest blocks are connected, because many animals need to move around on the landscape. They can spend a lot of time in an interior forest block, but at the end of the day, they may need to move to another block for a different component of their biological needs. And so they need a connected landscape. And in the case of Okemo State Forest, again, under the star here, it is one of the critical pinch points of a connected landscape here. So it's connecting the large forest blocks to the north, the Coolidge State Forest to the Green Mountain National Forest to the south and a little bit to the west, as well as you can see kind of easterly to some larger forest blocks in Athens and Grafton. So this sits really in a very key spot for connectivity. So important is this feature, the connectivity feature of this property, that it has been the focus of a lot of effort, a decades-long effort to protect and conserve this connectivity, this habitat. It's been known by many names: the Mount Holly Bear Corridor, the Green Mountain Wildlife Corridor, the Okemo Wildlife Corridor. We refer to it today as the Southern Vermont Wildlife Corridor. And it's been an all hands on deck effort, again, emphasizing how important this property is. So many partners, the Mount Holly Conservation Trust, a powerhouse as they are to get stuff done, the Vermont Conservation Board, Housing Conservation Board, VLT, Forest Legacy Program, so on and so forth. Those, to me, when I think of wildlife resources, those are my landing points. Is the highest value here is this interior forest and the connectedness of the landscape that this property affords us. So, when you start to drill down into, we have this landscape context I just provided, but you start to drill down into the nuts and bolts of the habitat, the specific habitats, it gets pretty overwhelming pretty quick, but I will tell you that it is a wildlife biologist's dream and their worst nightmare, because the property on one end, the dream end, is really diverse. A lot of valuable habitats. And this is just a small sampling at the top part here of some of the habitats that can be found out there. But there's vernal pools like Danielle talked about. There's ledge habitat. There's tip ups and, on and on. And it's just such a large property, has a really diverse array of habitats that host a diverse array of wildlife as well. So there's the dream part of it. The nightmare part of that, on the flip side, is that us scientists like to categorize or inventory and know everything and consider all these things. And it becomes really overwhelming because there's a lot here to consider with respect to wildlife. To drive that point home, when you look at the Wildlife Action Plan, which is another roadmap that the department produces, and in fact, departments all across the country produce these wildlife action plans. And it's basically an all hands on deck effort to identify the species in the state, which some are common, some are even game species, but some are not common, some are threatened by different things. But it's to identify those species that have some discernible threat or we have no information about. And we put them into a list. This is plants, insects, fish, birds, mammals, everything. We put them into a list and we categorize them as species of greatest conservation need. That list, those species are all attributed to certain biophysical regions. In this case, the Southern Green Mountain biophysical region. And within the natural communities that Danielle was just talking about. So that list, those species are all fitting into those blocks. And when you add that all up here, you're literally talking about hundreds of species that could potentially be found in this property, on this property, based on the biophysical region that we're in and based on the natural communities that are there. So how do we deal with that? Well, first and foremost, we do the natural community inventory, which Danielle was just talking about. That serves as our roadmap on this property. When we know those natural communities, we have a pretty good sense of what species can be there based in association with those communities. Excuse me. The other thing that we do is we try to protect those habitat features, again, some of which are listed here, which we know offer microhabitats for a whole host of different species. And then the third thing that we do is we try to focus on some species, which can serve like as umbrella species. In this case, we've got black bear, ruffed grouse, and forest birds generally. And I'll dive into those a little bit each individually. So black bear are really a perfect umbrella species for management considerations because they are a habitat generalist. They occur pretty much across the forest and even, you know, other types of habitats like managed openings, roadsides. You see bear everywhere. And they do utilize every habitat on Okemo State Forest for sure. So they are a good umbrella species. So when we consider them for management, we're going to be managing for all of those habitats that they're part of. But there are three core reasons why we are considering this as a focal species. So the first gets back to the connected landscape. So bears are long-range dispersing animals. They cover a lot of ground. They need a connected landscape for them to move about on the land. And so when we have them as a focal species, it makes sure that all of our decisions here are going to be centered around maintaining that connected landscape, that interior forest. The other part of it is their reliance on mast. That's food sources. There's soft and hard mast. Hard mast are like acorns, beech nuts. Soft mast are like choke cherries and raspberries and the like. And bears are very tied to mast sources. Thank you, Tim. And so when we think about beech, for example, here on this property, there's a lot of consideration for, like what Tim was talking about, like the potential future loss of beech with the diseases that are knocking on the doorstep. So we need to make sure that we're considering bear when we're talking about forest to maintain the mast that's on there and enhance it. The last thing here for bear is their propensity to cause conflict with people. And we have a really good opportunity here where we've got a resort community partially on state land, and we have bear here on the property. So it's really just highlighting that need for us to work with our partners with the Okemo Mountain Resort to make sure that we're implementing whatever coexistence measures are needed to maintain a healthy, peaceful coexistence with the species and the others. The second is grouse. This is another species of greatest conservation need. This is an iconic species. Everyone knows ruffed grouse from shore. It's the fourth most pursued species by hunters in the state, which I found really amazing. Some deer, bear, turkeys, and grouse. They're also a species that people really identify with, that ephemeral, the drumming, that harbinger of spring. But they are in decline, mostly as a result of a maturing forest over years. I mean, we're talking a 30% decline over the past 3 decades in this species, mostly related to maturing forest, because they are an early successional species. They will utilize all successional ages of the forest, but they are reliant on early successional forests to complete their life cycles. And what makes Okemo so special here is because you have a large block where we have the opportunity to manage for the habitat specifically for this bird at a scale that it'll benefit it, because they're not a long dispersing species. They, 1-2 miles is the top dispersal. So they're born and they stay in that same area. So you need to create habitat that is accessible for the species to find. If you create it down in the valley, they may not find it. And the other key piece here with grouse is that they are very highly susceptible to West Nile virus. And with the introduction of that virus here in the early 2000s, their population the decline has accelerated dramatically. And Okemo State Forest, being relatively higher elevation, it's believed that we have our best chance of maintaining this bird there, because the mosquito species that is the vector for this West Nile virus is presumably less abundant at those higher elevation side slope sites. So we have a combination of factors that make this the ideal spot for considering grouse management. And the last is the forest birds. In 2014, Forest Parks and Recreation partnered with Audubon, Vermont, to do an assessment of the whole property, to assess the habitat first and foremost, but importantly to develop recommendations for managing the forest to be considered in the long-range plan. And just one note about why we landed on this particular suite of species we're focusing on. It's really important because here in the Northeast, we have the highest diversity of these birds, the forest birds, anywhere else in the continental United States. And in fact, many of these species have as much as 90% of their global population, breeding population, here in the Northeast. And so there are responsibility species. We have to consider them with everything we do. And so in partnership with the Audubon, we now have this document that has some management recommendations and an assessment of the habitat. So for the sake of time, I could ramble on more, but for the sake of time, I want to pass it off to the next.
Okay, microphone, wow. I'm Brian. It's freaking loud. Folks still hear me? All right, folks hear me now? Good. I'm Brian, I'm a state lands forester in the district, and my primary focus is recreation. So I'm going to give you a quick run through now of the highlights of the property. We're not going to hit everything, but we'll try to sort of hit the key recreational opportunities offered here at Okemo State Forest. We start out with trail-based recreation on the property. Probably our most popular trail is the Healdville Trail, which you may be familiar with. It starts down at Route 103, just past that a little bit, and climbs to the fire tower. It's about a 3-mile trail out and back, climbing up the northern slope of the mountain. It was built in the early 90s by the department with partnership from the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, and we still maintain it with the Corps. They were actually out there a couple years ago doing work for us. It's probably one of the more popular summer attractions for the property, but it's become more popular in the winter as well. And we've also started plowing the parking lot to accommodate that winter use. Catamount Trail is a winter ski trail also on the property. It travels 7.7 miles. You can see it on the map here if I can point. You guys see the pointer? Yeah, so it goes from there, sort of that corridor 7 orange line. 7.7 miles from the backside north to south on the western side of the ridge. And that's 7 miles of a 300-mile long trail that starts down on the Massachusetts border and continues up to Quebec. And that is managed by the Catamount Trail Association. We're happy to host them. Co-located with that in parts, and then in parts separate, is about 7.5 miles of snowmobile trail managed by VASP, which I'm sure folks are familiar with in local clubs. They groom it, they do the maintenance in the summer. And these trails connect the towns of Ludlow and surrounding villages with a larger 4,000-mile trail network when we have snow. Located partly on Okemo State Forest and partly on land owned by Okemo Mountain Resort are the Bear Climb and Moose Trek hiking trails. These trails start at the base of the Sunburst 6 Chair, and they climb up to the Peak Lodge. From there, people can get views to the east off the deck, or they can continue from there on the work roads to the fire tower. Okay. So we've already talked about it a little bit, but additional recreational resources on the property. Okemo Mountain Resort, obviously, is a huge regional destination for skiing. It's got 13 chairlifts, 127 trails by my best count. It's a popular spot, obviously, summer and winter, definitely in the winter. Up the Okemo Mountain Resort is the Okemo Mountain Road. This is a paved state forest highway, winds its way from the clock tower base area just to a little bit below the summit to a parking lot. It's open to the public free of charge, mid-May through late October, usually weather dependent. It's popular for sightseers. There are 2 roadside pull-offs on it where people can stop, picnic. We mow them. One of them's got a picnic table, views in north and easterly directions from those. And then at the summit parking lot, folks can hike about 0.3 miles up a work road, and that gets them to the fire tower and some more summit views. The road was constructed by the CCC. I think Aaron touched on that. It was constructed by the CCC beginning in the late 30s, and much of the original infrastructure on the road is still there and is aging and needs replacement. So we've been systematically working through a plan to replace and upsize culverts, improve base material in the road where there are issues and not good to pave over it the way it is, and manage drainage and drainage issues around the road. And then eventually, we're looking to resurface the entire length of the road in some fashion because we're aware that the current surfacing is at the end of its life. Let's see. At the top of the mountain, top of the road, you hike that 0.3 miles from the summit parking lot. You'll get to a fire tower that we've talked about a little bit. This tower was built in 1934. It was staffed until the 70s by department personnel. Used the sweeping views from the tower to watch for smoke in the forests below, looking for wildfires. And then they had, I think, telegraph or phone lines or whatnot up there. They could call that in. It was sort of an early detection system. By the 70s, that was sort of an outdated system, wasn't necessary anymore, and it was phased out. Today, though, the fire tower is still popular for those same views that it was originally built for. It's a key recreational destination in the summer. People drive up or they hike up or they ride the chairlift up, go to the fire tower. This summer, some of you may be aware, it was closed for a period this fall. That was for a major maintenance project, which improved visitor safety and fixed some components that were really aging out. We did new treads, added a bunch of safety things, so it should be good, hopefully, for another 100+ years. We go down the mountain now. The base of the mountain on the other side of 103 is Buttermilk Falls. Tim touched on that a little bit. It's certainly a recreation hotspot for the property. It's a series of 3 cascading waterfalls connected by a short hiking trail along Branch Brook. The area is especially popular in the summertime, but there are a lot of challenges for us in managing it. Visitor safety with all the waterfalls is one. There's a lot of soil erosion around the stream. We want to be very aware of that. And there's a lack of really adequate parking at the site, which can create some challenges. Okemo State Forest also provides a lot of good hunting opportunities for large game species, as Chris talked about a little bit, as well as fishing for brook trout and brown trout. We maintain multiple parking areas scattered around the forest to allow people access sort of into the more dispersed, further to reach portions of the property. We mow these, grade them, surface them as needed throughout the year. Finally, we've got 2 areas designated as primitive or leave no trace camping on the forest. One of these is just above the Healdville trailhead, and then the other one is out the end of Government Road. These don't have any developed facilities. They require people to hike at least 1,000 feet from parking or from a road. They've got to be away from the streams. We allow folks to stay for up to 3 consecutive nights in these areas, so long as they leave no trace, they carry in everything that they brought and restore the site to how it was when they got there. And that's, giving folks a way to get out there and experience it a little differently. I think that hits the highlights I wanted to share with you folks. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to water resources.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Buckley. I'm a fisheries biologist, so I'll talk a little bit about the, oh, Ryan moved it away. Hi, my name's Courtney. I'm a fisheries biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. I'm going to talk about the water resources at Okemo State Forest and a little bit about fish as well. So I think that this map shows pretty well just how much water we do have associated both on and around the mountain. So we have a number of headwater streams, which headwater just means the very, very start of where these streams originate. So all of the water coming off of Okemo flows into the Black River, which eventually flows into the Connecticut River, which eventually flows into the Long Island Sound. So water starting here goes a long way. And, making sure that these areas are forested, protected, keeps that water cool, clean, is good for us, good for people downstream, and good for the fish. So there's also on the southern edges, headwater streams to the West River and the Williams River, which continue, like I said, down to the Connecticut as well. There are 9 mapped wetlands with 39 seeps, various vernal pools, and many of these small mountain streams. Many of them are perennial, which means that they're constantly flowing throughout the year, and a number of them are intermittent, meaning that they go dry at certain times of the year. We all experienced quite the drought this summer. Some of those higher elevations were dry, but that typically means that that water is subsurface, not that it's gone. So especially at these headwater areas, water is coming out of the ground at a lower gradient. And then as it starts to pick up momentum going down a steep slope, it'll start to accumulate. And that's where we start to see those drainages begin. Where water accumulates, you can see it a little bit easier on the map over here, but there are the vernal pools, wetlands are mapped there. The largest stream coming out of Okemo is Branch Brook, which has been highlighted a few times, and flows right through Healdville and Buttermilk Falls and that the Ludlow Gap. So the same way that people throughout the centuries have utilized stream corridors as path of least resistance for travel, that continues. That's where most of our roads are. So we do have some overlap and concerns when it comes to overlapping roads and water resources, which is why we do work with roads on the property that manage water to make sure we're not having an outsized impact. I think another way that we can help to categorize waters for increased protection is through our water quality standards. And we use categorization of A1, A2, B1 and B2. And that basically just helps us to identify and communicate that these are very important, high priority waters that are not necessarily in need, but high priority to continue to conserve and protect for the various benefits to both people, wildlife, and fish. So something I say often is like, what's good for fish is typically good for people as well. A number of these headwater streams are the source of the public drinking water in Ludlow. So really clean, cold water. We talk about water quality, and I think people typically think of like toxins and pollutants, and it is that, but it is also the nutrients that are in there, making sure that they're like in good balance, right? Enough nitrogen and phosphorus, dissolved oxygen so aquatic organisms can breathe. And what I focus on most around fish is stream temperature. We have a number, I think Brian talked about fishing opportunities around Okemo, and it is, I think Jewel Brook in particular is an area that we do water quality, so water temperature monitoring and trout population sampling every year, and has been by far and large one of our best brook trout streams, but really also for brown trout. We see upwards of 6,000 fish per mile there every year, and water stays really cold. So Chris talked about species of greatest conservation need. That is a species that's identified as being one that we want to keep in mind and do the most to conserve. So brook trout are Vermont's only native trout species. Brown trout have been naturalized here by the late 1800s. They came over from Europe, and rainbow trout were introduced in the early 1900s from out west in California. They've naturalized here in that, we protect them in the same way, but brook trout specifically are like kind of the canary in the coal mine of really cold, good water quality. And we have been making sure that not only are they present and prolific on the landscape here, but that we keep these waters cold so that we have better water quality downstream to continue to allow fish to live in these areas. I think there's some photos here. Some of them just a little bit of the different like water types that we came across. We did some stream habitat assessments this summer, and looking at not only where was there water, where was it dry, but the different types of slopes and things like that when it comes to where are barriers for fish, where is water flowing the fastest, what does the past impact on forestry, agriculture in this area, what impact has that had on aquatic habitat, specifically around trees. So another saying that we have is fish grow on trees, which is interesting, but we think about water flowing over the landscape with no trees is moving a lot faster. Those tree roots are slowing water down, helping to keep it cold by shading. They're dropping their leaves and they're falling in, and that is all the base of the nutrients for fish, so all the food that they need, and that also provides the structure and protection for them from predators, from us, from raging floodwaters, is all places where they can hide and get protection. We talk about shading to keep things really cold. If you're out in your backyard in the middle of the summer, You're going to be much more comfortable under the shade of a tree than out in the blazing sun, and that's not different for these fish. So having water coming out of Okemo State Forest that is in the 50s to low 60s in the summertime when it's 90 degrees outside is hard to find downstream. So we want to make sure that we are maintaining that to have fish here.
Okay. Thanks very much. We're going to wrap up the presentation portion and switch to the open house. Before we do, I just want to make sure that we kind of tie up our piece and make sure you understand your piece as well. But just one takeaway from me in watching this presentation, and I've seen a lot of them, is just it's a really good reminder that management planning is an infrequent and really special opportunity to get the laser focus of our specialists from across the agency on a particular unit, and it doesn't come up that often. So it's really wonderful to be able to do this deep dive. They will be here to answer your questions tonight on any of the resources and information we shared tonight. And you all play a critical role in helping us move this process forward. So I want to make sure that we wrap up by making sure that you know how to engage and how to comment. So as I mentioned, this is really just the beginning of the public scoping process. It will run until January 23rd. You can, if you'd like, submit a comment on your way out, share with us your thoughts about management of Okemo State Forest into the future, but you don't have to do that tonight. There are many different ways to do that. And we also have other resources that we hope you'll take the time to look at after this meeting. We do have a link to an online survey. You can send us an email to our A&R State Lands Planning email address, or if you prefer old-fashioned mail, you can send an email to our office in Montpelier. All of this information is available on those handouts that probably you received when you came in, but if you did not receive that, please pick one of those up on your way out the door. And please also, if you're interested, give us your email. We will use that to notify you of next steps in the process. So whenever we're ready to release a draft plan and to invite your feedback, once again, we'll contact you by email if you're providing that to us at the sign-in table. The last thing I want to note is that we have a really incredible story map. And so you've seen a lot of maps in the slideshow tonight. You will see the maps located around the room. All of that is in a really beautiful digital version. We call it the story map. There's a link to that, I believe, on the handout that you can get as you're leaving. So you can watch this recording. It will be posted to our website tomorrow. So you can watch this again, you can look at the story map, and then there are many different ways to provide your comment after the fact. It is 7:20. We plan to be here till 8 o'clock. I'm going to ask our staff to go to their stations, and then we will be here to have conversations with you until we start to wrap up around 8. Yes. Yes. Not in story map. Great question. The story map is already up, and the slides we can post on the website as well. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for coming.